Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So we will be bringing up the speakers in a little while. Meanwhile, we're just sorting out a few things here. Let me just change some things. Let me just bring up our first speaker, Aurelia. In a second.
Hi, everyone. How's it going?
Good.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to be here tonight with you all and to kick off this event with my talk, albeit virtually. So my name is Aurelia Specker, and I work on the developer relations team at Twitter. I've been in this job for just over 3 years now, and I live in London, in the East End, for those of you who are local tonight. I'm sorry I actually couldn't join you all in person, but I am very excited that we are now restarting this chapter of the Twitter developer community in London after, I don't know, what feels like an eternity. So tonight I want to talk to you about the new Twitter API v2 and how you can use the new endpoints to listen to and analyze the public conversation on Twitter. I'm also going to include a couple of demos in the second half of this presentation. Specifically, I want to show you how you can use some of the newer functionality available with the Twitter API v2. And this is going to include fields and expansions, which are a brand new feature or functionality that you can use to get back exactly the data that you want, and tweet annotations as well. But before I jump into this content, I want to start by setting the scene to ensure that we are all on the same page. I'm hoping that we do have some newer members of the community here with us tonight. So I want to make sure we all know what an API is to start with. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. Not something you need to remember. But in short, APIs allow a product or service to communicate and connect with other products or services. So a good example of this would be the weather data that you're able to get on Google. That data is sourced by Google from a third-party weather provider via an API. And Google is able to surface this weather data to you via that API. So in other words, APIs allow different applications to connect with one another and to access and share data. So in the case of the Twitter API, it's an API that allows you as a developer to build apps and solutions that have a programmatic connection to Twitter. You can use the Twitter API to learn from and engage with the conversation on Twitter. And you can also allow your own end users who use your applications to connect to Twitter programmatically via your own apps. So what does this actually mean? Well, developers use the Twitter API to do many things, and here are some of the most important use cases. One of the first ones here is learning to code. The Twitter API is a really great way to get started if you're learning about APIs, but even more generally, if you're learning a new programming language, it's a good API to incorporate and use. Building bots is another very common use case. All of the bots that you might interact with on Twitter actually use the Twitter API. I myself built a bot in 2019 when we used to still commute to work, where I would get notified if there was a delay on the tube line that I used to take to work. Improving the Twitter experience. Recently, actually, someone built a bot that reminds you to include alt text information if you were to tweet an image without including a written description of what the image is about. Or another example here that you all might be familiar with is Block Party, which was built to help Twitter users manage and block unwanted content on the platform. Understanding the global conversation, we have a great example here on the right-hand side. This was an app that was built to understand and visualize real-time trends, sentiments, and conversations as they unfold on the platform. And then solving real-world problems. And this is one that I want to focus on a bit more. And I'm now going to take you through an example crisis management app that was recently built using the Twitter API. Now, before I show you this example app, I just want to set some context around the problem that developers were trying to solve. So as you probably all know, the COVID situation in India got really bad earlier this year around April. Now, India has a huge population. We're talking more than 1 billion people. And so as more and more people were getting sick, hospitals were reaching capacity, were getting full. And as a result, people started having to receive help directly in their homes, things like oxygen cylinders or other medicine, etc. And so what people started doing is they started going to Twitter, started posting on Twitter to find and coordinate the help that they needed. So they were asking for beds, oxygen, medicine, and more. And this quickly escalated to a point where hundreds of thousands of tweets were being sent on Twitter asking for help. You can see this here. This is an infographic that Reuters put together, and it shows some of the example tweets that we were seeing being sent on the platform. And so this is where this example app, COVID Army, comes into play. So this is one of the numerous apps that were built using the Twitter API during this crisis to provide a UI where people could find relevant tweets and send help quicker. So the app here specifically provides matchmaking between the people who are tweeting their requests and needs for help and the people who are able to fulfill those requests. And volunteers were using this app to filter tweets based on location or resource type, as you can see there, and then reach out to people directly to help coordinate resources. So this is really, in my opinion, at least, an inspiring and powerful example of how you might use the Twitter API to help solve problems, and in this case, even help solve lives. So now I want to focus a bit more specifically on the Twitter API v2. So I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but we are currently in the process of rebuilding the Twitter API from the ground up. And specifically, we're moving away from version 1.1 to the newer version 2. Now, our goal is to build a simpler API that provides consistent access, that provides more consistency across all levels of access, which would include things like authentication, the request parameters that you might send, or the response payloads that you would get back, as well as launching new concepts such as versioning or being able to curate the JSON responses that you get back when you send a request to the API. And we are also using this as an opportunity to address some of the feedback that we've heard from you all over the years, and building new features and functionality that we're missing from v1.1 and that can allow you to do more things with the API. So many endpoints are now available with the API v2. You can see them listed here. There are more coming, but these can broadly be categorized into 5 buckets at the moment. So the first is accessing historical tweets. You've got recent search, which gives you access to data going back 7 days in time. Full archive search gives you access to all of Twitter's history, going back to March 2006. There is an asterisk here because this is currently only available for certain levels of access, but that will change as we continue to build this new version of the API. Tweet counts, which gives you the number of tweets that match your query during a given period. And then you can also get tweets in real time. Sample stream just gives you 1% sample stream of all publicly available tweets as they're delivered on the platform, whereas filter stream allows you to filter the stream of tweets, public tweets in real time to ensure that you get exactly the data that you want. And then we've got a whole bunch of other endpoints that allow you to interact with tweets, with users, and very excitingly, we've got spaces as well. So this is brand new, and I'm going to let my colleague Daniele talk to you about this in his talk later on. So there is more coming, as I mentioned. We are building, for example, the replacement for post statuses update, which allows you to create new tweets. And you can find more details on all of this if you follow this link, t.co/roadmap. Now, in terms of new metadata and functionality that's available today in v2, we have the following. So tweet annotations, I'm going to focus on that in a little while, so I won't dwell too much on this one now. Conversation IDs, which is the topic of our next presentation. I mentioned spaces. The API now allows you to access poll results and poll options. You can also do things like hiding or unhiding replies programmatically, accessing pinned tweets. And just this month, we launched Media Alt Text field, which is delivered through all endpoints that provide a media object and allows developers to build more consciously for accessibility. So I briefly mentioned that one of the new things with version 2 of the API is this ability to curate the JSON responses that you get back and ensure that you only get back the data you need. So you can see the difference in payloads here. So on the left, we've got a payload as it would be delivered by version 1.1 of the API, whereas on the right-hand side, we've got an example payload, which is the default payload that you would get back with version 2 of the API. So as you can see here, what you're getting back with v2 is significantly decreased, and you only get the tweet ID and the tweet text. Instead of returning all the available fields in the tweet payload, v2 just delivers this simplified default payload, and then you have the ability to specify what fields you want to get back, should you want additional information returned in the payload. In addition to this, you can also do things like expand or rehydrate certain objects within the payload. So for example, you could request the user object or the media or place objects. You can also request to get more information for a referenced tweet, for example, in the case of a quote tweet, etc. So let me show you what fields and expansions look like. So first of all, I want to flag this page to you. So this is at t.co/Twitter API Postman. And this is basically a complete Postman collection, which contains all available endpoints in v2. You can see those here. And then a description of the optional parameters that you can use with those endpoints. So it's a really great collection to get started if you want to just try out the new API or just get started without writing a ton of code. So you could click Run in Postman here. So I've already done this. And this is basically going to take you to a view like this, where you can see the different endpoints available in v2. Now, before I want to start using the API, I'm going to need to go to my developer account. If you don't yet have a developer account, I'll tell you how you can apply for one towards the end of my presentation. And you'll want to basically grab the credentials, so API key, secret, bearer token for the developer app that you want to use. So I'm going to use my testing app here. And under keys and tokens, I've already generated my bearer token, but this is where you could get this information. And what I've done is I've passed this bearer token as a variable in Postman. So I'm going to show you how to use tweet lookup. So if you go to the authentication section on the bearer token, you can see I've got that here. And I want to look up this specific tweet here, which is a tweet that was created by Twitter Dev a few months ago. So the one path variable that I have to pass through here is the tweet ID, because I have to specify what tweet I want to look up. And then I can send the request. So here we've received this tweet back. And like I mentioned before, we're getting back the default JSON response, which is this tweet ID and tweet text. Now, if I want more information, this is where I can use fields. So we've got tweet fields here. And under the description section, you can see a list of all available values that you can pass here to request more information. So I am going to request as many fields as possible, all publicly available fields for this tweet. Send this request. And here we go. You can see that I'm getting a lot more data in this response payload. Things like the ID of the author who sent the tweet in the first place. I've got the conversation ID, which we'll talk about more in the next talk. when the tweet was created, public engagement metrics, the language of the tweet, etc. Now, this is where the other feature expansions comes into play. So you can request more information about an object that is referenced in the tweet payload. So in this case, let's say I want more information about the user who tweeted about this tweet, the author ID. So I can request this expansion author ID. And if I send this and collapse the data portion, which we've been looking at, you can see that I've got this additional data now, which is this user object. Now, the default fields that are returned for the user object are the ID, name, and username. But again, I can get more information this time by using the user fields parameter. So this is here. Let's see, maybe if I cancel it and try again. There we go. So again, if I collapse the data portion, you can see that the user object now contains a lot more information, including when this user profile was created, follower metrics, the ID of the pinned tweet on this user's profile, etc. And really, this is how fields and expansions work with all endpoints. So I'll quickly show you the search API, recent search, which gives you access to historical data going back 7 days in time. The only required parameter here is the query. So I'm going to look for all tweets that mention the word summer, because it feels like we've not had a summer here. I don't want retweets. I'm going to send this. And so I'm getting all of those tweets back from the last week. But if I wanted to, for example, just get an additional field to know when each tweet was created, I could add created ID, sorry. Oh, yeah, that was wrong. Created that, send this, and then here I'm getting all of this data back with this additional field that I've requested. So this was fields and expansions. So hopefully this makes sense, and hopefully it'll enable you to consume Twitter data without having to sift through tons of information that you actually don't need, and just get exactly the data that you want. Now, the other feature that I want to focus on this evening is tweet annotations. So this is also one of the newer features available with the Twitter API v2. And in summary, tweet annotations give you a way to understand contextual information about a tweet. So tweets are analyzed, and then the result of this analysis leads to the annotation of tweets. And this is really based on the content of the tweet. The result of this is 2 new elements that have been added to the tweet payload. One is context annotations, and the other is entity annotations. Now, context annotations are derived from the analysis of a tweet's text. So those are based on what's implicitly mentioned in the tweet. On the other hand, entity annotations are programmatically assigned entities, but these are pulled based on what's explicitly present in the tweet text. So I'll show you examples for both of these in a second, but just want to also note that we have support for multiple languages for annotations, including the ones that you see listed here. And we do have more languages coming soon, including German and Tamil. I think fundamentally, one of the real benefits of annotations is that it makes it easier to discover tweets that otherwise might be harder to surface, because it means you can filter tweets using annotations rather than just a simple keyword search. So before, when I was looking for tweets about summer, I was only surfacing tweets that actually had that keyword summer in the tweet text. But there might be other tweets that don't contain that keyword, but that are still about summer. And that's where context annotations comes in handy. So this is what this looks like. So this is how you would receive a context annotation in a response payload. So again, this is really based on what's implied in the tweet text. And context annotations are made up of a domain and entity pairing, which you can see here. So this tweet is a tweet about our new course for academic researchers. And the domain that's been surfaced here is interests and hobbies. Domains tend to be fairly high level. And then technology is the associated entity. You can see technology and computing are not words that are present in the tweet's text. But the way that this has been done is Twitter classifies tweets semantically. And this is actually how topics are surfaced on Twitter, if you're familiar with that feature on the platform. But in the back end, Twitter curates lists of keywords, hashtag, @handles, etc., that are relevant to a given topic. And then if a tweet contains any of these identified words or handles, etc., it's going to get annotated accordingly. So this here is a good example of the context annotations that would be assigned to this example tweet based on an analysis of the tweet text. So, if you wanted to find all tweets about Wimbledon and you just looked for tweets that mentioned that word Wimbledon, you wouldn't get this tweet back. But because of key terms such as 20th major or tennis championships, and probably also the date range here, this tweet was annotated as being relevant in the context of Wimbledon. Now, the second element that I mentioned that has been added to the API response payload is entity annotations. So these are programmatically assigned entities, and they're based on what's explicitly there in the tweet text. So you can see here, 2 entities have been surfaced. Both of them are Twitter, and this is because Twitter is mentioned twice on the bottom line of this tweet here. So then entities are categorized as belonging to one of 5 categories, which is the type field that you can see here. So an entity can either be a person, a place, product, organization, or other. And then with each entity, you get a categorization confidence score, which is the probability field here, and also an indication of where in the tweet text this entity is present. And this is the start and end fields that you can see here. And so if we take the same example that we were looking at before, this tweet would yield the following one entity annotation. So it's programmatically identified Djokovic as an entity of interest. It's categorized Djokovic as being of type person, and it gives this categorization a confidence score of 97%. And then it also tells you the entity Djokovic starts at character 9 and finishes at character 16. And so this is where I have my second demo. So I want to show you an app that was built for demonstrative purposes. And it shows you how you can surface topic-related insights using tweet annotations. So specifically, it's an app that analyzes recent tweets that were sent by users on Twitter to identify topics of interest that matter both to the user in question, but also to a user's followers. So let's look at topics of interest for a specific user. So we're actually going to pull this data from my account. So say you don't know who I am, you're interested in knowing what topics are of interest to me, or at least what topics do I tweet about. So this is going to pull the 300 most recent tweets on my timeline, and then it's going to analyze the data and categorize it or sort it in order of most frequent annotation and surface the most frequent annotations that are found in my tweets. So if you recall, context annotations are made up of a domain and entity pairing. Now, the domains here that you can see are fairly high level, so I won't spend too much time on those. But the entities get a bit more specific, and that's where I find it gets a bit more interesting. I tweet a lot about Twitter. Maybe that's not too surprising given I work there. Food, technology, computer programming, again, not all that surprising given my role. COVID-19 is topical for me. Coffee, I'm a big coffee fan. And if you go further down, you know, I love dogs. I do a lot of Pilates. So you can see that these topics, or I can tell you that these topics are definitely relevant to me and to my profile and interests. And then this second section here surfaces the contexts or the annotation entities. So those are then categorized as person, place, product, organization, or other. And I think the places is the most insightful in this example. I live in London. I'm from Switzerland. You know, I used to live in Wembley a year ago. And just before the pandemic, I traveled to New York and Houston. So it kind of does paint a picture of some of who I am. Now, the second one here is similar, but it's going to look at that data for a user's followers. So I'm going to look at Twitter dev here. So I'm interested in understanding, okay, well, who follows Twitter dev? And what matters to those people? So this is actually going to take a small sample of followers, literally just 50 followers, and it's going to analyze the 10 most recent tweets for those 50 followers. And then it just takes a second to load because it has to sift through quite a lot of data. And then it does exactly the same thing. So again, domains are fairly high level, but we can see that, okay, well, maybe politics are of interest to a certain extent. Sports, TV shows, music is there as well. And then technology is the number top most relevant annotation. Again, not so surprising given these are followers of the Twitter dev account, but we see Barack Obama is there. We've got cryptocurrencies, some Summer Olympics data, etc. Boris Johnson, so we can make some assumption that maybe some of those followers are in the US, some are in the UK. And yeah, I mean, you get the gist. And again, this is a small sample of data, right? But if you were to pull more data, you could get a much more comprehensive image of what matters to those people or profiles, purely based on contextual information about the tweets that they have sent and that are publicly available. And I'll show you this last one here. So I did mention that you can pull tweets by filter or filter tweets with annotations. So this is what this is going to do here. So say I want to know, okay, well, who on Twitter is interested about coffee, for example? So I'm going to pass in the domain interests and hobbies, and then the sub-entity coffee. And then I'm going to submit this. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull tweets from the past 7 days in English, only from verified users. This is just to kind of reduce the number of tweets we get back, whose tweets have been tagged with this annotation of coffee. And then it's going to return a list of profiles here with profile information. And in a second, it should also surface the tweet that was actually tagged with this annotation. So you've got examples here, etc. So I think I'm coming up to the end of my 30 minutes. I will be taking questions at the end once we've heard the other two talks as well. I hope this has been interesting to you and has inspired you to test the new API v2 if you haven't done so already. But before I leave you, just want to flag a few links here or resources to help you get started. I mentioned you'd need a developer account. So if you don't have one yet, you can apply for access by following this first link here. You've got all of our documentation on the new Twitter API v2 if you follow this second link. The Postman collection I showed you, our community forums if you want to engage either with other developers who are using the API or with the developer advocacy team at Twitter. And finally, our roadmap if you want to find out what's coming next and what we're currently working on. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Aurelia. Yeah, so as you know, this is a hybrid event, so we're kind of navigating a lot of like different things here, the virtual part as well as the in-person part. this is really in preparation for other hybrid events that we want to do in the future. So there's obviously going to be a lot of learnings on how we do hybrid events, combining the in-person speakers as well as virtual speakers. Yeah, so I think we're ready for our next speaker, and Aurelia is going to be back later for the Q&A with all the speakers. So if you have questions, just you can type them in on YouTube Live in advance, and yeah, we'll take them to the speakers later on. So thanks, Aurelia, and we'll see you again in a little while. I'm going to bring in our next speaker. Hi, Terence. And I'm going to bring in my friend, hang on a second, Gerard, who's going to be introducing Terence. All right, so over to you too, Gerard.
Hi everyone, my name is Terence Eden. My pronouns are he, him. As I said, this is my first talk in front of real live people that I can see, smell, and touch. I will not be smelling or touching any of you. For a bit of background, I'm a technologist. I do lots of work with government, but this is not a work-related talk. It doesn't represent the views of my employers, past, present, or future. We are saving questions till the end. But if I happen to use a technology term that you don't understand or an abbreviation that's confusing, please just stick your hands up or stick something in the chat. My job is to try and make life simple for you. So let's have a conversation. Twitter is about chatting to people. In later days, it's also become about complaining to brands and occasionally receiving unwanted dick pics and horrible things like that. But mostly, it's about having conversations with people around the world. So before we go into a sort of deep technical discussion, I think it's helpful to understand the basics of what a Twitter reply is. Now, this might sound obvious to some of you, but I promise it's slightly more complicated than most people think. In fact, in the beginning, there was no way to reply to people on Twitter. So this is 6 months after Twitter launched. This is the first time @ syntax was used. This is NSA saying @buzz. Oh, you can read it there. So this was 6 months after Twitter launched, and that was 15 years ago, only 14 if you don't count 2020, and I don't. And what's interesting to notice is that this isn't like normal @ syntax. There's a space, and then there's a username, and that's not what we expect to see. And in fact, when this was first introduced, it took some explaining. So this is a blog post 6 months after that, in 2017, explaining to people how to use the @ button. Can you imagine that? There's this magic button, and when you click it, people can see what you're saying to them. And of course, this introduces the difference between mentions and replies. So if I type at Jen, then that's just a message to her. But if Jen has sent a message and I hit reply to it, that is a reply. So there's this programmatic difference between mentions and replies. So how do you get replies programmatically? Well, you can't. So the current API lets you get replies to your tweets, but what you can't do is say, here is an arbitrary tweet, I want all the replies to it. That doesn't exist in V1 of the API. There are workarounds, though. This very handsome and intelligent poster on Stack Overflow gave some tips on how you can do it, and it involves using the search API and then filtering and then smushing, and it's not a great experience. But that's history, that's ancient history. As Aurelia said, we're now on version 2 of the API. And that gives us a brand new search API, and all sorts of wonderful things come with it. So as Aurelia said, you get a whole bunch of metadata now when you ask for tweets from the API. And so you'll be familiar with some of them. Public metrics is how many likes and things like that, what language it is. But there's this new thing, conversation ID in the metadata. This is brand new to Twitter. We've not had this before as developers. So how does it work? Right. Every time you send a post to Twitter, every time you tweet, that tweet gets an ID. So I send a tweet saying, hey, everyone, what's your favorite pizza topping? That gets ID 123. You send a reply to me saying, oh, my favorite pizza topping is pineapple, and your tweet gets ID 456, but it gets conversation ID 123. You send a reply to him saying, pineapple on pizza? What? Your tweet gets ID 789. It's in reply to 456, but it has conversation ID 123. Anyone who replies to my tweet and anyone who replies to their tweet and to their tweet and their tweet and so on gets the same conversation ID. So how do we get that in an app? How do we say, okay, I want all the replies in this conversation? It's pretty straightforward. So API twitter.com/version2. We want tweets. We want to search. And this is the recent search API. So this is part of the search API. And we say the query, rather than saying query summer or query Wimbledon, we say query conversation ID 123, blah, 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 and then max results and anything else. Now, there are some limitations to this. So it is it's the recent search API, which means that it lasts 7 days, which is, it is what it is. You can only get 100 tweets back per API call. So if you're familiar with the API, you'll get a next token, and then you can send that, and you can get more tweets and backwards and forwards like that. And you receive the tweets in an unordered list. So you need to put them into your own order. But what do I mean by order? What is a conversation? What do we mean by a conversation? Twitter, unfortunately, is really bad for viewing conversations. So this is what a typical conversation looks like on Twitter. We see it as a single column. Whether you're on mobile or desktop or whatever, you see a one-dimensional view of a conversation. Top to bottom, that is the only thing you get, one-dimensional. But that is not what a conversation looks like. What if we take this conversation, we break it out of 1D and into 2 dimensions, like that? This is the structure of a Twitter conversation. So at the top there, you can see the first person has said, hey, what's your favorite pizza topping? And then there's a reply to that saying, I love pineapple. And loads of people talking about pineapple on pizza. And then at the bottom, there's some people talking about, oh, I really like mushroom. Oh, I really like sweet corn. We can see who's replying to who and how the thread is structured. This is what a conversation looks like. Now, those of us of a certain vintage will recognize this from Usenet and news groups and things like that. This is what conversations used to be before the web took over. Threaded conversations are the only way you can keep track of what's going on. And if you're young and hip and on something like Reddit, you'll also be familiar with this. These are Reddit threads, and you can collapse some of them and say, oh, I'm not interested in this side of the conversation. I want to read that side of the conversation. Can we do something like this for Twitter conversations? So this work I'm about to present to you, these are demos. They're heavily inspired by Lucy Pepper and her idea of monkey deck, which is to take a tree of replies and to fling a monkey around the branches, seeing what you like. There will be no monkeys in my demo, unfortunately, but I wanted to give a shout out to Lucy there for inspiring this. So I'm going to show you some demos, 5 demos. What could possibly go wrong? So here is what a simple conversation looks like on Twitter when you break it out into a 2-dimensional tree. So here we can see this is my tweet at the top, and is that working? Yep. And so you can then see everyone who has replied to me and everyone who's replying to them. The colors here indicate, they give you a bit of metadata. So red lines indicate that someone replied very quickly. Blue lines is a much later tweet. And this immediately starts giving you some interesting visual information. So as well as being able to expand the tree out and look at branches of the conversation, you might look at this and go, well, hang on, one person, the Nyan Cat avatar, is dominating the conversation. Is that interesting? Why are there loads of replies to this tweet here? What's going on there? So straight away, you can get this idea of the shape of the conversation. Now, that's fine for just a basic conversation. What happens if something is a bit more complicated than that? So this is a thread which went sort of mildly viral a few days ago, and you can see here loads of people have replied to to Angela's first tweet in the thread, and you can see down here, oh wow, there's this whole extra conversation going on over here. What's that all about? We can also see that her second tweet thread didn't really garner much attention. We get sort of 3 replies to it, and that's it. But then this one, all of a sudden, a much more interesting and engaging tweet. And again, we can look at this and say, oh wow, Angela is actually replying to lots of things. There's this weird conversation over here, which 2 people are having in her mentions. And straight away, you get this sort of, okay, this is the actual shape of the conversation. Let's go a little further. So that was a complex conversation. This is a really viral tweet. So you may have seen here someone wanted to see how far they could get from Charing Cross by bus in 24 hours. And hundreds of people followed this and replied and retweeted. What does this look like in tree form? Because if you try and follow this as a one-dimensional list, it is impossible. You cannot really see who's talking to who, what's going on. This is what it looks like in tree form. Wow, there we go. You can see there is this massive set of branches going on all around here. If we zoom in, you can see right at the top, lots of people started replying to this user, and then the branches go on. I'm not saying that this is the new interface for Twitter, although if Twitter want to turn this into the brand new interface, I think it'd be cool. What I'm saying is this is a tool for visualizing a conversation. You're no longer stuck in that sort of tyranny of one dimension. You can expand and look through and see, hang on, what's happening in this conversation? Why are loads of people talking about this particular bit of the thread? And as you go on, you get this sense of, wow, who's talking, what's happening? This is an interesting tweet. This is the one right at the end. You can get lots of people talking about that as well. So that's pretty cool. We can now information about that, which you can't really see by looking at a linear one-dimensional conversation view. So we've gone from 1D and we've gone to 2D. I tell you what, I'll just show you this interactive one as well. So this is the same conversation. You can see 48 replies here. Let's take a look. Oh, are we interested in this branch of the conversation? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, nothing interesting going on here. I think this could be, again, not necessarily the default interface for Twitter, but being able to follow a thread through like this, see how many replies there are, going through, and saying, actually, what's in this branch of the conversation? I'm less interested in that. Back over there. No, let's collapse that. I'm mostly doing that because I like the animation that it does. Fun ways that you can start interacting with tweets and say, you know what, maybe this tweet is getting negative attention. I want to close that off. I never want to see people replying to this set of abuse. So as I said, we've done 1D, we've done 2D. Let's go to the next dimension, which is 3D. Whoa! So if you remember that first conversation that I showed you as a 2D branching tree, this is what that looks like in 3D. So here, the blue nodes are tweets. The white lines are replies, and a little green arrow just saying that is a reply to that. And this, again, I don't think there's much metadata that you can get out of this, but it's just nice to be able to look through a tweet through a different lens and say, look, these conversations branch off like this. When we get to more complex things, so here is, this tweet has had hundreds and hundreds of replies in the middle. Let's out on that. You can get an idea of the structure of the conversation here as we move around. We can see these huge branching lines of conversation. And we can also see up here, wow, this tweet has also got lots of people chatting about it as well. What does that tell us? Why has this tweet suddenly become really interactive? Now, one thing I'll show you with this, which you might have spotted, is there are a few orphan branches of the conversation. So you can just see here these two. Now, the search API will not retrieve tweets which are private or have been deleted. So if someone has a private account and replies to you, the API will not bring it back. Now, this gives us a slight problem here. So I send a tweet, what pizza do you like? You reply from your private account saying, I really love pineapple. The people who can see it will reply to you, and they will still have conversation ID 123, but the Twitter API will not retrieve your tweet. So you end up with these little orphan branches, which you can sort of see there and there. So that's just something to be aware of. But again, I think this is a sort of fascinating way to start viewing and visualizing conversations. Let's go more. Let's go 4D. What do I mean by 4D? Well, okay, so we've got the basic structure of the conversation there in 3D. But in this demo, what I've done is, well, I shall show you. So here, the size of the node represents how many retweets and how many likes it's got. So straight away, you can see this node here. I've also made this a bit interactive, so you can take a look and you can read what people are saying. This node here has had quite a lot of retweets versus this one here hasn't had a lot. And again, I've done some animation just so you can see where replies are going to. And if you really want to, you can move things around. There is no reason for doing this in an interface. I just thought it looked cool. So this starts telling us, okay, which tweets are getting lots of replies and interactions. So if I go to this one here, okay, it takes my laptop a little bit of time to render it because there's quite a lot of tweets going on. But immediately you can see, oh, hang on, this tweet here has had quite a lot of retweets versus some of the others. If we sort of spin it around, zoom in and out, again, you start to get this sense of, look, what's going on here? This has had loads of retweets, loads of replies. This hasn't had very many retweets, but it is getting quite a few replies. What's happening in this part of the conversation, which is making it much more interesting. And you can see again, these big, long conversation threads which are taking place. I think, it starts giving you an idea of saying, how do I conceptualize, how do I visualize a Twitter conversation in more than just a one-dimensional list? How do I break it out into 2D? How do I break it out into 3D? What information can I find out from that? Let's take that viral bus tweet again and do that in 4D. Now, this does take a bit of time to render out because these are hundreds and hundreds of nodes floating around. And yeah, straight away you can see, look, that's a really heavily trafficked tweet. So loads of people have been retweeting and liking that. And you just get this, wow, this is actually what a conversation looks like in multi-dimensional space. You're no longer restricted to trying to read through a list of tweets and going, well, what's the interesting one here? I can see straight away, wow, hang on, this one is, this one over here, this is interesting. What's happening on that? Oh, look, lots of replies happening there. This starts to give you new ways to interact with tweets, new ways to visualize conversations. So in the spirit of all good demos, there is one more thing. So this is something that I coded up at lunchtime. So let's see if this actually works. So we've talked an awful lot about, oh, it's me twice on the screen, fantastic. We've talked an awful lot about 3D, and visualizing 3D tweets on a 2D screen isn't necessarily the easiest thing you can do. Wouldn't it be great if we could go inside the tweets and take a look at them? Now, I know Samsung probably sell a whole bunch of VR gear. I don't have any on here, and it's hard to demo, but I do have a web browser with AR on here. So what if I take a tweet and put it into augmented reality? If I start looking around this tweet and saying, okay, well, what's happening over here? Can I zoom in on that bit? All of a sudden, tweets aren't just this 2D thing that we're looking at in a linear fashion. They are sort of living, breathing, organic structures which we can go in and pluck and say, look, hang on, this tweet, perhaps this node here is getting lots of abuse. Let's snip that tweet off like that. And so, yeah, these are the sorts of things that you can do when you play around with the conversation. Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, Terence. That was very interesting. Let me just remove your slides. Okay. Great. As we said earlier, there will be questions. So there's going to be a Q&A at the end. So if we can make sure that people who have questions, from the audience, type it into YouTube Live, and we'll pick them up and bring them to the speakers later on after our third speaker, Dasisto. So our next speaker is Daniele Bernardi from Twitter, and I'm going to bring him in now. Just give me a second. Hi, Daniele. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Great. Per- Perfect. Yes, loud and clear. Uh, i Hopefully, the audience can hear us. So we had a bit of a challenge earlier with regards to the sound. As I said, this is a hybrid event. This is the first one we're doing. Yeah, in London, and there are obviously like some issues that we need to, not issues, but yeah, I mean, they're expected. It's a tech event. There's always going to be something cropping up, but yeah, we're obviously trying to kind of understand how we can effectively hold hybrid events. So it's giving us a lot of like I'd say lessons that we can take to future events, like this. So yeah, thanks everyone for your patience for the speakers and the audience as well. So I'm not gonna take too much of the time allocated for Daniele, and I'm gonna let him get started. Your slides are there, right, Daniele? Let me just make sure that yeah, I can see it. Hang on a second.
Perfect. No,
And
I see them
I'm
too.
gonna give you the floor. Yep. All right. See you in a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all. Hi. Good evening. I wish I could be there with you, but this is actually one of the most physical things I've done this year. So I'm excited to be like virtually, but not as virtually as I was supposed to be. So Spaces API. Spaces are the social media equivalent of the Mars colonization. It's a huge statement, I know, but I'm saying this because it's a new dynamic, it's a new medium, and so there is a distinct and tangible sense of exploration that is typical of something new, a new medium. It happened in the past with radio transmissions, with movies, and it happened with the invention of the internet itself, and maybe it can happen again. My name is Daniele. I am a developer advocate. My pronouns are he and him. I work and live in California, but I used to live in London, which is why I'm particularly excited to be here. And I wish I could be there with you more physically so, but hopefully soon. Every Thursday, I also host developers who build something on Twitter Spaces, and they talked about what they built and what they are looking for. And I hope that you'll be next there. We released the Spaces API just 2 weeks ago, but we're already seeing a lot of Spaces integrations and apps being built. And this is because developers know that we are enabling that new Mars exploration, that new communication dynamic, just like it happened with the early days of the internet, like I said. And here's a fun story. 30 years ago, in the early days of the internet, there was this browser called Netscape. Now we all use, Chrome or whatever Microsoft uses, which is part of Chrome as well. We all know what the browser does now, but can you imagine being the first person to come up with this idea? What would the browser do? What would people do with it? And those were the problems that a company who built the first one of the first commercial browsers, Netscape, was tasked with, and they didn't know the answer to these questions. In fact, all they wanted to do was to just put this browser in a box, like an actual cardboard box, physical box, and ship it and sell it to large companies. And that was it. That's what they thought the internet was back then. And so they wouldn't know that 30 years later, people will be using mobile apps, mobile phones, having Zoom calls, purchasing things online, or even sending tweets. And essentially, they couldn't see that the internet was more than just a computer app and a web page. So who did? Developers did. People like myself and you did. And it's thanks to developers if we have programming languages like JavaScript that are now embedded in the browser. And I'm having this conversation with you through a web browser today. It's thanks to developers if we have e-commerce. It's thanks to developers to empower everyone to create their personal space or web page. Nobody could envision things like social media, software as a service, or anything like we have today. And this is why Netscape eventually closed shop, but the internet and developers survived, and the internet survives thanks to developers. And so as we build a new medium, both us as Twitter and developers are shaping a completely new set of opportunities. And the way people use spaces today is going to evolve in ways we, again, Twitter, can't simply predict. But maybe you do. So today, what is Spaces exactly? Spaces is a new way to have live audio conversations on Twitter. It allows expressions and interactions in the moment and in real time, just like the rest of the service. And we're building and testing this in the open with the help of users, people on Twitter. And there is a thriving community there who constantly is in touch with us, gives us feedback, and Spaces, the product, evolve quickly and meaningfully thanks to all this input and ideas. People who listen to Spaces can generate conversations back on the text Twitter, the platform, and people who read tweets about space can even jump in and listen to a space. If the host of the space allows, people can also speak, and this enables a flow of ideas and conversations over both text and voice. So in Spaces, we have clear roles. First, there's a main host or a creator. It's the person who owns the space, and it's the one who can set up the space, change the topic, decide who can speak, and obviously end the space too. Hosts are content creators, and they use Spaces to give you interesting content and to build and grow their communities. So eventually, some hosts, some creators want to make money off their Spaces in probably two ways. One is maybe they have partnerships with brands and sponsors, and they get paid that way, or they can monetize their Spaces directly through a thing called ticketed Spaces. So Spaces can be free, but they can also be paid for, and you can purchase a ticket to enter a space as a listener or as a speaker. So those hosts and creators, they all have the interest to make sure that space is engaging and that you have a good time, you learn something new, or you have a chance to connect. The host can invite up to 3 co-hosts to help, and they pretty much have the same powers as a main host or creator. They can stop the title, usher people in and out of the conversation, and so on and so forth. Then there are speakers, and they can talk to the space, but they cannot end the space or change the title, but you're going to hear from them if they're speakers. And then there are listeners. Listeners are probably the most important people in the space because they want to hear from hosts and speakers about that specific topic or the content of the space itself. They can also request to speak, for example, if they want to ask a question or if they want to share their thoughts. For them, it's important to understand what spaces they can join because they don't want to miss on conversations they want to be part of. So people can look for spaces in the Twitter app this way through a search experience. And when they do, they can tap on one and they can see the participants and they can decide if they want to join or not. And that's pretty much it. So going back to my example early, it's you that decide what that's it actually mean and what this new medium we call spaces becomes the new dynamic that can change the way we communicate. So that's it. As I said before, it's actually means more like, do you see the opportunity here? And the opportunity can start with very small steps. You can start, for example, by understanding what the listeners and creators need. Like I said before, we talk to a lot of them, a lot of listeners, a lot of speakers and hosts and creators, and we heard that everybody have needs and wants the products to become a certain way. But remember, we're Twitter, and we are a small company. We have a lot of ideas, a lot of feedback, but it's likely that we don't execute immediately on all this feedback at once. And that's why we're relying on developers, and they're creating energies to step in and solve the gaps in ways that we couldn't solve immediately or as good as developers could. So We heard from listeners that they have a need to understand what's relevant to them and what's in the moment, because like I said, they want to understand what the topic is and want to have some sort of relevancy with their interests. Some users can see an Explore tab for spaces in the app, like I'm showing you right now, but it's limited, and it reflects our understanding of the conversation unfolding through spaces. But we heard that listeners first want to find spaces that are relevant to them, maybe because they are interested in a specific topic, or because who's talking is an expert in that specific topic. And they also want to discover spaces on their own terms. People want to jump to a space because they saw it feature in a gallery of spaces, or because there's a website, there's a live list of top creators, or by some other ways we don't enable right now and I can't even imagine today. So we want to make sure that Tour users have a choice, and this choice sits outside of the app. Creators, on the other hand, want to understand if their efforts are paying off. And right now, the Tour app doesn't really offer an easy way to understand how many people are in the space and how this audience is growing over time. So what if you could create a dashboard to help hosts understand that? And they also want to be noticed and grow their audience. They don't just have to grow their listeners. They also want to grow their followers, because more followers mean more potential people who can listen to a space. And it can also be an opportunity to tweet more and maybe be recognized and known, not just for the spaces you run, but also for the now all style tweets. And we know hosts want to monetize their spaces, like I said before, through sponsorships or partnerships, or through ticketed spaces directly. For me, as a host, I know spaces work because I'm gaining followers every time I'm hosting the spaces. But right now, I don't have a way to understand how many followers I'm gaining via spaces. I don't know if they're liking my content. I don't know if they want to hear something else than the things I usually talk about. So again, what if you could step in and understand how many followers creator gain after they're hosting a space? And what if you could build these tools and make a creator successful? And what if you can actually make money off of these tools yourself? So I hope by now you're asking yourself, how do I do it? And the answer is with the Spaces API. The Spaces API are new to the V2 Tour API. We built them 2 weeks ago. And we built them specifically to address the needs of listeners and creators. So you can build these discovery experiences for them, and also for creators, bring more insights into who's listening to a space and have a live count of that. What's in the Spaces API? For the first time in years, this is big, we're adding support for something completely new. We're adding a new top-level object called the Spaces object. Aurelia showed you before 2 objects, tweets and users. That's what we had. And 2 weeks ago, we had this welcome addition of a new top-level object. It contains all the metadata you need to understand what's going on a space. And obviously, apart from the idea of the space and its running state, those are the default fields you will get. You can also see the title, who created the space, when. You can get full details of who's currently speaking and hosting, and how many people are in the space. We'll go in detail in just a moment with a demo, but for now, all you need is to know that this object updates in real time, and that we are already working on bringing even more details for you to see. And again, piggybacking on Aurelia, Aurelia introduced expansions, and so with the Spaces API, you can expand full user objects for any of these users here too. So anytime you see a numeric ID next to a creator ID, for example, you don't have to make a separate call to the user API. You can just get them from there, and they will appear in the includes users, just like Aurelia mentioned before. In Spaces, we have 4 endpoints, and they are divided into 2 groups of functionality. The first is search spaces. It allows you to search by title of the space and by its running state, live or upcoming. You can schedule spaces in advance up to 14 days in advance. And so you can have people sign up for a notification when you do that. So when the space is about to start, those users, your listeners, will receive a notification. If the space is live, it's just live. For example, this could be used to give me all the spaces about Samsung that are happening in the future. The second functionality is spaces lookup. And it gives you all you need to get a specific space. For example, a space you know the ID of, or spaces by a specific person. You know about Twitter lists. It's a way to keep track of tweets by specific users. So you can create basically a list of users who are experts in things like cryptocurrency. And it will show you, it will stick in your Twitter app, and you can browse that list and see tweets only about that kind of topic. With the Twitter API, I could theoretically use the list API to get the list of users in that crypto list, and then check if they're also hosting spaces. And that's a great way to understand relevancy of a topic. Cool. In the search specifically, this is a sample request. You can search, like I said, by keyword, hashtag, mention, anything else in the title of a space, and you can then filter by live or scheduled spaces. This is an example request. I'm just requesting some fields because in the V2 API, you have full control of what fields you want returned. Next, we have lookup by creator, which is one of the lookup functionality I was talking before. If you know the user ID of a user, you can look up live or upcoming spaces created by one or more users, up to 100. You can request the fields you want. This is a different request. Like we said, you can specify the fields you want. And this is the base functionality. You can look up a space by its ID for a single space. So give me this space. And returns live and scheduled. And if a space has ended, you will also know that. It's useful to understand whether you need to ignore that space because it has ended. And there's similar functionality. You can also request up to 100 IDs and get those all in one request. So you don't have to make 100 separate requests if you want to understand the status of 100 spaces. And like Terence said, every good demo, every good presentation has one more thing. It's my one more thing. In the past, the Twitter API has been more focused towards the needs of larger customers and enterprise developers. This ends today because with the Spaces API, we're actually making them available free of charge to all of you. That's right. If you go now and you apply for access to the developer, to the Twitter developer portal, and you want access to the Spaces API, it's all there for you. You don't have to pay a dime for this. And there's the same access available to everybody. And this, like I said, marks a change in the way the developer access to the platform. And that's because our platform is opening up to our developers. Our goals is to earn creative energy from developers. And so we hope to see the most innovative apps built on the Twitter developer platform. And with that, I'm going to switch to my demo, hopefully. I'll start with a search query. Let's see how many spaces are talking about Twitter. And here, just like the Postman example, this is just an interactive visualization, and I'm going to select some fields and some expansions. So I'm looking at the spaces search endpoint. My query is Twitter, and the state is live. So I'm basically trying to understand how many live spaces are there that mention the word Twitter. That's great. I'm getting 4 results with some IDs. Amazing. Is there anything else I can get from here? Yes. So if we look at spaces fields, there's a selection of fields, and those are all the fields we can get. We get the date of creation, the ID of the creator, the ID of the host, the ID of the space itself, which is exactly what we're seeing here. How many users have been invited to speak? If the space is ticketed, the language inferred of the space, the count, the live count of participants, schedule start. If, like I said, spaces are can be scheduled in advance, and so if you scheduled a space, you could see for what time was supposed to start, the ID of the speakers, when it actually started, the state, which we have by default, the title, and the time any of the metadata, like the title of the spaces, have been changed. So for now, I want to understand the language and maybe the title. Let's run it again. Perfect. So we have space in Japanese. Looks like it's a Japanese space, a Turkish space. This doesn't look like English. Chinese and English. Let's take a look at the participant count as well. And you see that the payloads, when you request, it just expands. So we're seeing some good spaces, some more intimate spaces, and we can just double down and understand even more. We can expand also on the creator ID. So by default, the creator ID is just an ID, and it's an ID of a user. And you're probably noticing that as I refresh this request, some of these fields, like the participant counts, update in real time. So I want to better understand who are the creators here. So I'm going to expand on the creator ID. I select creator ID from expansions. And when I run, you're going to see an includes payload. And this payload is going to contain an ID, and a name, and a username. Those are the 3 default fields from the user response. It doesn't tell me a lot about the space. So what can we do here? We can actually head over to the space by ID and get a single space and double down on some of the metrics here. So we want to understand if this creator has been successful, if this creator is a little bit more interested in other things, or if the topic in their profile description matches the topic of the space. So right now we see that they lost one listener, which is totally fine. Let's request the creator ID expansion again. So this is the creator of this space. Let's see what they have to say about themselves. I'm the R in Python. So judging by the title of that space, how to grow on tech Twitter, I think there's pretty much a relevance between this host and creator and what they're talking about. So it's probably it's a space worth listening to. Let's see the public metrics of this user. Wow, it's been followed by a lot of people. So maybe this is a person that's worth following as well. And that's exactly the dynamic that Spaces is influencing here. When you listen to a space and you find the content relevant, you want to hear more of that content, and that becomes that relevant. Again, you can also get other spaces by the same user ID. So we can head over to the user ID and understand if this is the only space or if there's a scheduled space. It's the only space for now. Cool. I'm going to bring back the other window now. Thank you again for the coordination, London. So this is what we saw right now. What can you build with this? Like I said, the Spaces API have been tailored towards specific needs of listeners and creators. The ability to discover more and the ability to understand if my efforts are paying off. We heard listeners want to discover spaces in ways other than the ones we built. And so this fantastic software engineer from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Janika, she built search spaces. This is a search page based on to search things based on keywords, including some predefined keywords based on common terms. And it's been built with the Spaces Search API. Of note, this is the fastest Spaces app built on the API. It appeared less than 24 hours after we launched. How that happened? When we say that we heard feedback from the community, we meant it. So every week, before we launched the Spaces API, we connected with hosts, with speakers, with developers, with listeners, and they gave us their feedback. And Janika, she suggested that we share the design of the API well in advance, which we did. And so she took that design and she started to understand how the API would look like, how to connect to it before even connecting it for real. And so when we were ready to launch and the design was very closely matching what we shared before, she was already ready to publish this. And the result was amazing. Another one. Hosts want to understand if they're making a name for themselves, and so also want to understand if they're growing their audience. And so Andrew Lyons has a marketing background and built a Spaces leaderboard. It shows top hosts based on the number of people who attended their Spaces, and it includes a cumulative follower count. So each host can understand how big their audience is, how it is growing. And this leaderboard also contains a dashboard that shows live and upcoming Spaces by top hosts. And you can build your own as well. You can build your own integration with a sample project that we released on our Twitter Dev GitHub that helps you get started. It shows you how to connect the API and to build live participant count dashboards and attendance metrics. In this example, you're going to see a space. You're going to see all the speakers that have been speaking, how many followers do they have, who's the host, the duration. And there are things that we don't provide through the API. For example, what is the maximum attendance count? What is the minimum attendance count? And you can calculate that yourself, and this sample code shows you how to do it. And so if you're inspired, talk to us. We'd like to help you out. We'd like you to understand where you're headed. Just send me a direct message on Twitter. You can join my weekly Spaces on Thursdays as well. Reach out on Twitter Dev as well on Twitter. We actually talked with Janika that I just showed last Thursday on our Thursday Spaces. And this Thursday, we're actually going to hear from Andrew. So if you want to hear more and you want to suggest features or things that you might find interesting, just reach out and let's explore together the future.
Okay. Hi, Daniele. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks for that. And thanks to everyone who joined us in person today, and everyone joining us virtually. But I'm gonna bring back everyone so we can have a Q&A. If you have questions, if you can just type it in on YouTube Live, that would be great. Okay. Gerard's here. And Terence is just getting set up. Okay, perfect. I think we've got everyone. So as I said, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for all the speakers and all the interesting talks that you've given just now. Are there any questions from the audience? If not, then maybe we can, Gerard, you and I can maybe just come up
Maybe
with
there's some
questions,
questions.
or a question from the people who are joining us here.
I can go catch.
Yeah, maybe you can. Yeah, has anyone got questions? All right, there's
one right at the back there, Ron.
over there.
Yeah, this one is for Danielle. From the Twitter team, what is coming for Spaces? I mean, what new features can you share in terms of discoverability for Spaces, etc.?
Thank you. So discoverability is one of the main aspects, like I said in the presentation, that we're trying to solve for. There are two aspects here. Try to show things that are relevant in the moment and relevant by context or by content itself. From the main product standpoint, we know that listeners want to understand things on their own terms. And so the main thing is we have an Explore tab that is going to be more and more curated with what we think is relevant to that user. But the Explore tab is something that will be always like prone to feedback and input and will evolve in our own way. You should use that as basically the Twitter way of helping you discover things. The second part is I want to understand things that are relevant to my community, relevant to the content at hand, and this is kind of the opposite side of the things. I want to understand things that I'm probably curious about, but not curious enough to follow that closely. So help me, there are two different discovery needs. Help me understand what's relevant to me and help me learn something new. And for these two, that's why we're trying to bring developers in and to have them build their own discovery experiences. One thing that will come relatively soon, and we're trying to explore support with the API as well, is that you can tag spaces with specific topics, and then just like context annotations that already I showed before. And that's one of the things that might help discover topics of interest. So if that happens and it becomes a feature in the main Twitter app, that's something we're definitely planning to support for on the API side as well.
Thank you for that, Daniele. Any other questions from people here with us or people watching us virtually?
Simple question. Last time I checked the version 2 API, it was by some, invite only. Is it available for everyone now?
I can take that. Thank you for the question. Yes, it is now available for everyone. So I believe what you might be referring to was Twitter Developer Labs, which we launched, if I recall properly, it was 2019. And that was probably initially a smaller group of developers. But for a while now, the new API v2 has been available for all developers. All that you really need at this point is a Twitter developer account. So you do have to apply for access if you don't have one. But once you've submitted your application and gotten approved, you can start using the new v2 endpoints. There are different kind of levels of access, but you can use a lot of what I showed you today with the free access.
Any follow-up questions? Okay, there's one over there. Thank
Hello.
you, Gerard.
I was just wondering if Terence had considered using his ability to follow conversations in spaces. So if a host started a conversation on a topic, then users could see how the conversations went and maybe join in certain threads according to certain criteria.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea. I don't know how threaded the conversations within spaces are, but I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it. I think it's one of the things where I know that there's more media tweets coming and people posting audio and stuff like that. So I think it can be very interesting if someone, sorry, this is cutting out. If someone is posting a bit of audio here and you've got different replies over there, being able to follow a conversation like that, I think, yeah, could be really interesting. So if the Spaces API has it, I will try and use it.
We should talk. No, but that's something that's very interesting for creators as well. They want to understand, you're going to see that there's a network effect that creates within the community based on people. You can basically obviously share the link to your live or upcoming space, and you're going to see people commenting on that, replying, retweeting, and you're going to see some dynamics unfolding. So it would be great to apply that visualization you showed in your demos to something like Spaces.
Great. I think there's a question here from the audience. I'm just going to bring it up. It's from James Malvern, who's watching us, who's joined us virtually. So let me show the question on the screen. So the question is, did Twitter ever consider making Spaces a standalone app apart from the Twitter app?
I wish I could talk to the people in charge of mergers and acquisitions for that. No, that's a great question, and also backstory for Spaces. Spaces was actually a standalone app to begin with. It was Squad, and there was a team that then joined Twitter from their standalone app. So it's kind of the opposite dynamic appeared. Most of the people that actually made that initial app are in London. So great to see that talent coming from there.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't see any more questions. Gerard, do you have any question or any other questions from the audience here?
Not much of a question, but I've been following since the release, and I can see already many things happening. I think it's a really exciting space, and I will keep an eye on it for sure.
Pun intended on space.
Yeah. I'll ask a question. I don't think you can answer this question. It's $1 million question or $1 billion question that everyone asks. When are we gonna get the edit, button? I don't think you have an answer for that. But, but if you have any insights or anything you want to say about that, I think a lot of people will be happy to hear anything to do with that
Twitter
request.
has an edit button. You just delete the tweet and post a new one.
Yeah, and then repost it, right? Yeah, I've done that so many times. Anyway. Oh yeah,
that is a
actually there is
fantastic.
another billion. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, this is where actually developers can step in. Like, we're probably never going to change that. Sorry. And like sometimes I also wish we had an edit button myself, because the number of typos I just gave up. Or you can join a space and correct your thoughts after join the space itself. But no, this is where developers can actually step in. There still is this service called Brizzly Plus, and they said, I kind of want an edit button, but I think there's a better way of doing that. And so they built a service that gives you the undo tweet feature. So it gives you 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute to rethink your tweet. And so if you tweet through them, you have that ability to correct and edit your tweet before it gets sent. And that's a great alternative, like very, very ingenious way to kind of make it up for a perceived shortcoming of the platform.
So did you say that's part of Twitter Blue?
We also have that as part of Twitter Blue, but it doesn't mean that other developers can build their own alternative to Twitter Blue. Also, a reminder that Twitter Blue is only live in certain parts of the world. It's not a worldwide effort, and it's going to take time. So if you there's no reason why you couldn't build your own alternative. Like I said, this is an open ecosystem.
And Twitter Blue is live where right now? I think it's Canada and another
US.
country, right? Just Canada and the US. Okay. Why did you forget about the UK? Sorry.
We didn't know
Anyway,
it was too much of interest.
Okay. Any other questions? Can't see anything anymore. Gerard, you have one.
I actually have another question, and this is completely unrelated, but I realized just a few days ago, I mean, there must be a lot of people like wondering what happened to the follow button, because it just changed, and then it was like, what? I mean, I was like puzzled a little bit. There was the dark theme. I mean, there has been a lot of changes in the UI.
Well, there's a font change, right?
There's a font change,
Yeah,
and there's some other things happening.
There's a fun little thing I've seen with the font, which is if you manually type a smiley, so colon dash close bracket, there's a ligature which just causes the smiley face to jump up a little bit, which looks very cool. I'm not entirely sure if it's intentional. I see the Twitter crew smiling, so maybe it is intentional.
Some things are. There's another interesting. I'm a font buff, so I understand what we're talking about. But a ligature is a way to basically combine some characters as they typed and show them in a different way, as if they were like a single character or something that's closely knit together. So there's another one. If you use, I think, a combination of brackets and chirp bird icon, it renders the bird icon instead. And so sometimes you see some people adding a Twitter logo next to their name, and that's how they did it. It's very interesting to see. But yeah, we're rolling a new brand, and as part of that, there's going to be design changes to the app itself, and that's what you're witnessing right here. With that, we're also taking into account a ton of feedback, including and especially like accessibility in mind. So expect things to move and change as we hear more feedback, and keep this feedback coming. There's, like I said, what I appreciate of this company more than any other employers, including my own. Like I used to be employed for myself, and I think I love this more than the things I built myself. Is that we have a culture of trying to be as open and listening more than talking. So our Twitter accounts, our Twitter handles are there to submit feedback. It's true with Twitter Dev, it's true with Twitter Spaces, and it's true with the Twitter design team. So if you feel that you have something to say about the Twitter button, just reach out. Like, we're humans after all, and our success is determined by how much you like the app and the design. And so that's the opportunity to let directly the team know how this is impacting your experience on Twitter, and they are more than receptive to listen to your feedback.
Yeah, I remember I logged into my web app, and somehow the heart was different, and I was wondering what's happening. And then I looked into my mobile app, and then the heart was red, but on the web was kind of shiny, and I was like, okay, something is going on with you, Gerard. Maybe too many coffees. But then I realized that it's just the Twitter team. It's just having fun with Twitter these days. So yeah, that was kind of a surprise.
Yes. So anyway, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of interesting things, that's coming up, which is always great. Of course, changes, they always hurt, in the beginning, but we just get used to it. I think that's how I was with the font change and all of the other changes. For a few days, I was like annoyed a little bit, but yeah, I got used to it. So yeah, it's fine. But of course, the one point that you raised, Daniele, is about accessibility. That of course is important to address. Because we want to be inclusive, with everything that we build. So yeah, I'm glad that the team is looking into that. One thing I want to ask, actually Aurelia in particular, and Aurelia, we've known each other for a few years now, right? When we were like doing events at the Twitter London office, with Andy and the rest of the team. How big is the DevRel team actually globally?
The DevRel team globally actually is not that big. I'm trying to think because we've grown, we've hired a few heads, but I would say no more than 15 people for the Twitter API. So there's another kind of partner engineering team for all APIs ads related, but for non-ads related APIs, it's just 15 of us. And we are actually hiring a head of the developer advocacy team. Sadly, I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think the role is open in London, but it is open in lots of locations in the US. So if you are interested, do head to our careers page and have a look. But yeah, we're a small and mighty team, Jen.
Okay, and a follow-up question to that. Of course, as you know, I do a lot of work in the women tech space. How many women are there in the team, in the DevRel team?
Good question. Well, off the top of my head, but I'd say it's fairly split. Maybe not quite 50-50, but there are quite a few. So definitely something that Twitter is very much aware of when we do hire, making sure that we do represent various backgrounds, genders, cultures, etc. So our team is quite good.
Okay, any other questions from the person with us in the venue?
I'll just say,
or
if anyone watching
virtually?
wants access to the demos that I've created, if you want to play around with them, send me a DM. I'm at Edent. It is a very rough and ready demo site, but it does work. You can paste in any conversation, and you'll get that visualization.
Yeah, and that was a very cool demo. So that's great. Okay, so I guess we're gonna wrap up earlier than planned. Any like last few, I don't know, tidbits or words of wisdom from our speakers?
I've
So-
never been accused of being wise, so. No.
Okay, so Daniele, anything else you want to share?
Absolutely. One thing that I want to highlight is that this is a changing moment in the history of Twitter. Like, when was the last time we had a product so new? And the dynamics of Twitter are going to probably change if developers are going to be successful in bringing those dynamics to life. Like, there's never, it might sound a little cliche, there's never been a better time, I think, for us as developer relations to be so close with developers and to see this, like, there's like, sometimes there's Jack that tells us, have you made this change to the developer platform? Like, it comes from very high up. And so this is the commitments that the company has to the developer platform and to renewing the developer platform. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, Twitter as it is will radically change. And if it does, it's thanks to developers, because they are the ones that are even closer to users. So if you're ever wondering what should I focus on next, I might be biased, but this could be a very nice, interesting journey.
And if I can add to that, we do want to hear from you. We want to hear feedback you have for us. I mean, Daniele did mention that briefly before, but any questions you have, feel free to reach out either via DM or on our forums. But yeah, we want to be talking to you constantly. So hopefully we'll hear from you.
Great. So I want to actually ask Gerard, who has kindly co-hosted the event with me. So he's a friend of mine who also organizes other events like around GraphQL and Angular. Any last few things you want to say before we wrap up?
Oh, well, I was really excited about the event. I mean, besides the virtual option in StreamYard, we are here in person, and the venue is awesome. So this is one of the first events around tech in London, I believe. And I'm just excited to see some movement. I'm not sure in other places like San Francisco or Bay Area, but over here it's been quite devastating, I would say, for tech. And yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that you invited me. I mean, I'm kind of plugging into this event.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the time and the support. So I'd like to thank Samsung actually for hosting us, today. As Gerard has mentioned, this is actually a very great venue. And if you're in London, if you're in King's Cross, St. Pancras, make a point of visiting the venue. So it's their experience store, so you get to see, all their products that's displayed here. So it's a really, really cool venue and a really, really cool place, to be in. So yeah, make a point of visiting Drops Yard in King's Cross, and drop by Samsung Experience Store as well, which is on the upper level. It's easy to get here. So thank you very much again to everyone, to Terence, to Aurelia, to Daniele and Gerard, and also the people who joined us here in person. Thanks for taking the time to actually be here with us. And thanks to everyone who's watching us virtually. So this is being recorded, and we're going to be sharing the recordings afterwards. So yeah, hopefully more people will be able to see this and learn from the wonderful talks and see the wonderful demos that our speakers have shown us today. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.